Thanks, Ahmed. Good morning, good evening, and probably evening, afternoon as well for some of you guys. So myself, I'll begin with, I will be the moderators for today's conversation with all the fantastic panelists that I have. Sal and Andrew from Google. I think Andrew will be joining us soon. Shelly from Dentsu and Bryce from Arbory. I'll definitely, they will introduce themselves in detail to understanding about themselves. And then hope you guys enjoyed today, and then understand about the new performance guidance that will be coming on soon. How do we handle it? What are the different things that we need to take care and things like that for next close to 55 minutes. Thank you. So Sal, probably, do you mind starting from you?
Sure, I am Sal. I am a senior technical solutions consultant. I've been a long time software developer for 20 plus years. I started my web development experience back in the days of Perl CGI and moved to Java. Used probably every major framework, including on Rails to various PHP and Python frameworks and so on. Been a long-time developer, and I'm involved now in the AEM ecosystem. I've worked with Adobe in helping them get AMP support in the Common Components toolkit. I'm also working with Adobe on Lighthouse integration with the AEM product.
Cool. Thanks, Shelly.
Sure. I'm Shelly. I've been working for more than 12 plus years in delivering digital experience platform to customers. I started with Spring Java and then moved to AEM. I started with 6CUQ 5.4 and now also working on 6.5 version. Then started working on the Adobe Marketing Cloud. So kind of have worked on delivering the content management, MarTech, and the e-commerce solutions. I've worked with clients across the domains like retail, fashion retail, medical e-commerce, or whether it's automotive or energies and utilities. And I have closely worked in different locations across the globe for the clients.
Cool. Thanks, Shelly. Bryce?
Hey, how's it going? My name's Bryce Acker. I've focused on web content management my whole career, starting back with EMC's Documentum, Microsoft SharePoint, and first got into the AEM space back in CQ 5.2.5 days, before really the major 5.3 overhaul. We founded Arbory Digital last year to focus on deep level AEM technical expertise. And we've built out a team of AEM masters, some of the heaviest hitters in the AEM architect space. And we're happy to run a soup to nuts AEM project or even just provide 10 hours of guidance a month. Many customers bring us in to run AEM health checks, review their code development process, set up CI/CD pipelines, and provide best practices in regards to their overall server infrastructure, focusing on cache hit ratios, CDN setup, disaster recovery, and performance tuning.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, guys. It's a pleasure to have you all here today. So before going in quickly, myself, Lokesh, the Vice President of AGC, and also work as a Principal Enterprise Architect for TA Digital. Without further delay, let's get into our first question. Hopefully our audience are ready. So Sal, if I have to ask you, let me start with you because what are the core web vitals, and according to you, and then what are the impacts will they have for the web performances?
Right now, the core web vitals are three starting. So what we're interested in is how quickly a page loads, how quickly is it responsive, and how stable is it. So we've put together three metrics to guide that. The first metric is LCP, the largest contentful paint. It's the idea that the biggest chunk of your content pops up first, and you want it to be within 2.5 seconds. The second is FID, the first input delay, how quickly things start being responsive. And you want it to be ideally under 100 milliseconds. And the last is cumulative layout shift, which is how stable is your page. And you want that metric to be about 0.1. You can get down to 0 actually and have a completely static layout with dynamic content. But the idea is to have your overall page layout be incredibly stable, so you don't have that jankiness of parts of your page filling out randomly in different orders. So what is LCP? So the time it takes to render the largest block. Technically, that's either your largest chunk of text or your hero image. That's generally what it is on most pages, and you want that to pop up, be visible within 2.5 seconds. You can get it down to a second. I've seen that, so aim higher than 2.5. And then first input delay. Well, what's FID? Everybody knows the experience of loading a page that does not respond to your finger. If you've ever seen like a waterfall chart or anything like that in the performance tools inside of Chrome, you'll know that what you want is to have the green bar, that wonderful little bar that says my page is responsive. You want that to be pretty much the complete experience. You don't want to have your page loading in such a way that there are synchronous blocks. And you want to have the first time in which the page is actually starting to respond pretty quickly. Okay. And then of course there's cumulative layout shift. Everybody's loaded a page where you're aiming to hit a link and then an ad appears there. That's bad. Nobody likes that. Makes your day miserable. You want to click on something, but you don't want it to go to the thing that painted onto your fingertips. So you want to have is that your layout to be stable. And there are techniques for doing this. We can discuss it later on. But that's it. Those 3 metrics to start with.
Cool. Shelley, do you want to add any more on it, on top of it?
Yeah, sure. So in my opinion, people buy experiences and not just product. And the kind of experience they will get on a web property would be highly impacted by its performance. Performance is actually relative. There would be 2 sites. One site would be, those 2 sites would be loading equally at the same page load time, but one may be perceived as loading faster if it is loading progressively. There could be another situation that a page is loading quickly, but then later on it's not responsive. So like historically, we've been measuring performance mostly in terms of the page load time, but that may not be the relevant metric, or that may not be the useful content that the user sees. So that doesn't make sense for the user or the user experience. Google Web Vitals, in my perspective, is providing those performance metrics that are actually relevant for the user experience. Like Sal mentioned, it's how quickly the useful content or the largest content which is meaningful to the user is getting loaded on the page. And then how quickly the page becomes interactive to the user. And then how much the content is stable on the page, like how much it is getting shifted once it is rendered. So all of this actually impacts user experience. And this gives more relevant or more useful metrics for the user experience. So in my opinion, Google Web Vitals are not only important with respect to improving our Google search ranking, but it's also important in terms of providing a good user experience. Also in terms of reducing the bounce rate. So if a user gets a good user experience, it leaves a good impression, and that definitely will reduce the bounce rate. At this point, I would also like to say that it's not just that we consider the performance at the end of the development cycle. It also becomes imperative that we include the performance improvement as part of our CI/CD process. So that it's like on a regular process, we are taking consideration of what the performance metrics are, how our new features are getting impacted, or they are impacting the performance, and how we can improve that as part of the regular development cycle.
Great. Yeah. Bryce, do you have any more points to add?
I would actually just say that was, I think, a great point by Shelley there. That first and foremost, these are obviously important to these Google metrics here, but it's very important just for web usability. But I thought she had a great point there that it would make sense to add these metrics as part of a CI/CD pipeline, where when your code is getting pushed out, you get this data back. And Google has done a good job of providing a lot of these libraries to be able to calculate this on the fly, whether in a JavaScript library or just based on a page load in a browser. So there's Chrome plugins, there's different other things where when you go to a page, you can get the results immediately, and you can automate that. And it would make a lot of sense to have that as a regular check through your CI/CD pipeline, so you can see your improvement or possibly any issues over time.
Absolutely.
Yes, the only thing I would add is basically what you just said. Yeah, you want to measure early, and get the measurements as the first part of the step. What you don't want is for you basically to build your app and then figure out how to make it faster at the end. You want to begin with the idea of like, this should be fast. We should be making things in such a way that it'll perform well when it's in face of the user. And just to reiterate what Shelley said, it's not enough for it to be fast. It has to feel fast, right? So in theory, you can have it a page which gets good numbers in Lighthouse, but does not feel like a good experience. You don't want that. You want it to feel good.
Absolutely. I think so far, most of the times, right? So we were all thinking about mobile first design or things like that, but we also start looking at having those performance aspect also by design. But I think with all of these three web vitals, that gives the architects or solutionists to think about that while design itself.
So we have a question from the audience if we can take on this topic. So this is from Sham. With respect to field data on FID metrics, what happens if user accesses the page and exited without clicking anything in the page? Is it considered 0 FID score or whole field tracking for the request is skipped?
I would have to actually look this up, but I suspect that bounces before complete page load are disregarded in terms of the page load performance. I can't imagine.
It might not even just calculate it. In the browser plugin, you don't get that metric until you actually make an interaction too. So, yeah. But yeah, that's a good point. I don't know what they do with the data.
There's one follow-up too. So can you provide some B2B site examples which have passed the Web Vitals site-wide?
I don't have that off the top of my head. The ones I'm currently working with are publishing sites, not B2B. But I probably could, I could probably post some to my Twitter feed later. So it wouldn't be hard for me to find some.
Okay.
Cool. Any more questions, Amit, before we move to the next question?
We can, yeah, I think we can move forward. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So the next question is about, like, how do I find out more about where my web property stands today? So it's good that all of those three web vitals we have implemented, but how do I measure the current state so that, we can make improvement on those aspects of it, right? Sal, do you want to throw a light on it?
Yeah, so we provided a bunch of different ways to get measurements. So it depends on where you are. Like I divide up the ecosystem to the three tribes, right? The people who make the website work, the people who make the website look good, and the people who make the website profitable. So the people who make the website work, generally speaking, you're probably going to use Chrome DevTools or Lighthouse in the command line. You might use the Web Vitals extension. The people who make the website look good, you're probably going to use some Crux data because you're looking at things in aggregate, maybe the Web Vitals extension. If you're on the business side, PageSpeed Insights as well as Search Console are probably what you want to look at. But again, we do provide a bunch of different ways to look at this. And again, if you're a marketing person, I'm not going to prevent you from using Chrome DevTools. I'm not going to lecture you or complain. Likewise, if you don't want to use Chrome DevTools and you're a developer, I'm not going to judge you, and it's fine. I use an editor from the 1970s, so I don't judge people. Yeah, so you have a bunch of different choices there. Right now, not everything supports everything, but that'll change in the future.
Yeah, got it. So Shelly, what's your go-to tool for this to measure?
So there is no single go-to tool actually. We have these tools which actually help measure in the lab in the controlled environment also. So like we have Lighthouse, which is there in the as part of the dev tools, Chrome dev tools, which will actually be providing us the vitals as part of our control environment, where we are checking for a specific browser, or we are checking for a specific network that I am testing on. So it's like a control environment. This is useful in terms of actually when I'm doing my development. So as part of testing my new feature, it's very useful that I can test my new feature, how the performances of my new feature is. Now I can also test the performance regression. So as if I include this Lighthouse as part of my CI/CD process, it will actually measure or it will try to assert all the audits as part of my build process. So it'll try to assert whether the audit passed or not, and then produce a report for that. So this is good in terms of when we are testing of building of a new feature. Then we also need to measure, or we need to have a real user monitoring as well. So in terms of using Crux, it actually collects the data of the real user data across the web. So they are spread across, and they get the data from them through their, and if they have enabled the browser sync, or if they have actually accepted the statistics to collect the user statistics. So that information is collected as part of Crux. Then as part of page site insights also, it does the same thing. It actually, if you provide a URL, it actually gives the real user data across the web, and across the devices they are using, across the network they are using. So it gives us a real user scenario, an actual picture. They might be getting the actual personalized content. So how the personalized content would actually impact the performance. And also how the network condition or their devices is impacting the performance. That real user data we will get through these page site insights or Crux. So that is really important. There's also one point that the first input delay or the interactivity metric, we cannot get that measured as part of our lab tools, which is like Lighthouse in the Chrome dev tools, because that is not able to take the user interaction. So as part of the actual user testing or the field metrics or the field tools we have, we actually get those kind of metrics or the real user data. So it's like we need to include one or more tools, not one tool would be enough as part of the entire performance analysis and improvement. So I would suggest to have something, one tool as part of the CI/CD process, and also to collect the real user data. There's also one point that I would like to add is as part of the Lighthouse integration, we also have stack packs. So that kind of really kind of interest me to understand like how stack packs would be working, because stack pack is something that actually determines what is the underlying platform, what is the end system, what is the CMS it is using, or what is the front end JS framework it is using, the website. And based on that, it tries to tell us the metrics that are relevant for that particular platform. I'm not sure like how effective the stack pack would be, but that is a really interesting topic as part of Lighthouse. That would be interesting and would be useful to implement as part of our implementation of performance improvement.
Yeah, just to add one more thing, I would welcome a stack pack for AEM. Right now, there isn't one. We do see stack packs for other CMSs, like there is for Drupal, there is for WordPress. AEM, it's kind of special. It's really hard to provide guidance because AEM implementations vary so widely. Most WordPress instances are basically a blog. They're indistinguishable from each other. AEM implementations are radically different. They're very different because they integrate deeply with enterprise systems, and those are not necessarily cookie cutter. They're all like kind of evolved over years and years and years. I would love to see that. The guidance we do provide for things like on the front end, my guidance is like remove as much of jQuery as possible. It's usually my go-to. But yeah, in general, like we do provide some guidance for those libraries. If you guys are using Angular on the front end for your AEM, which there are people doing it, or React or Preact, there is some guidance there as well. If you're using Gatsby, we have some guidance there as well. But for basically any plain AEM installation, we don't really have a stack pack for it.
I think there's the question on the same line. So do we have any API or node module or any other package to include them in CI/CD process to calculate these vitals?
There are ways to go have Lighthouse run from the command line CI/CD. I have partners that are working with Jenkins and have successfully integrated it. There's another way of doing it is to use something called Light Wallet, which is a performance budget tool. If you set Light Wallet to have a bunch of basically fail points in your CI/CD pipeline, especially in Jenkins, I know this is in Circle CI as well, I believe. You have it so that if your page load on your dev server is beyond, say, 5 seconds, it'll fail your build, which just gives you a good heads up that you accidentally included something bad. I remember having one meeting with a partner who told me that they accidentally left the largest size for every image as the default image, and they caught it, right away, and basically at that first commit, they made, I think there was a CSS error that disabled the source set feature they were using. So it ended up like serving the largest version of every images, which at this point were like 8 or 10 megabyte files. So the page took longer than 5 seconds to load and it failed right away. They caught that before it got anywhere near production, which is exactly what you want.
So do we have any more questions? Let me quickly check before we move.
There's a question from Amit over here. How would these metrics vary with different types of web patterns like single page applications or progressive web apps versus full page apps?
Yeah.
This is a known, this is me speaking for myself, not speaking for Google. I believe this is a gap in Lighthouse. We don't really provide like a SPA metric. It checks page load, initial page load. If you have a PWA that installs a service worker that then starts downloading in the background all kinds of information to speed things up, we don't really accurately reflect that in Lighthouse score. Like the fact that your first page might take 5.5 seconds to load, but subsequent pages are quick because it's just basically downloading a blob of JSON and refilling the frame. That's not, I don't believe that we're giving the best measurements for that experience yet. But if you're interested in helping us get really good metrics for that, I invite you to follow the Lighthouse community on GitHub and please tell us what we can do to make that, to give you guys better metrics there, because I would love to see that.
The more feedback you give, the better tools you're going to get.
Yeah, I welcome it. I mean, again, this is not perfect. I think this is way better than the metrics we were providing last year. I've been involved in Web Vitals since before it was called Web Vitals. I specifically have a note to remind myself not to use the internal code word that we had before Web Vitals. It's posted right in front of my CV vision, so I don't say this word. But yeah, so I've been involved with it since before it was called Web Vitals. So I understand how important this is. This is, I think, the best way of measuring how the experience will feel to your actual users.
And actually, Lokesh, oh, sorry, go ahead, Amit.
Go ahead, complete your thought, Bryce. I was
just going to say, just from an AEM perspective, there's a lot of tools. There's obviously a developer mode, debug mode you can enable within AEM itself. There's a couple different tips and tricks that are within the documentation, and we can provide some links after this. But to be able to get individual component timing, so as the AEM page loads, what components are loading, what order, and what is the speed that those are loading on. You can really narrow in on some bottlenecks and pain points with those, and maybe there is one component that held everything else up, and you didn't get your largest paint right away, or your load was really slow because of that. So it's good to really deep dive into the component loading of an AEM page. And really, I think they hit on it, but just including that the Web Vitals JavaScript libraries within your client libraries, your AEM client libraries, you can have it where it'll maybe in a debug mode, it'll provide and actually automatically give you that data, so you can go to the web tools and go to the console and see actually per load that your metrics. And obviously having that the Google browser plugin. What's nice about that is you can turn it on or off, where every single web page you go to, as soon as it loads, it'll pop up and it'll show you the score right there in the top right. So that's nice to have as you're testing your site, or even just surfing the web and looking at competitors.
Yeah, one thing you might want to look at is if you look at the Search Console or in PageSpeed Insights, PSI provides this little checkbox that you see the PSI score for the entire domain, level domain. If you see a large gap between your page load and your domain speed, that might be indicating that we're not providing the best, most accurate measurement of the initial page load, and that your actual field data shows that your site is much faster than the initial page load would suggest. That's valuable feedback for us.
Yeah. So one last question for this before we get into keeping time in mind. So for this question, so any ideas on how the announced change to search ranking to consider core web vitals will actually impact sites' SEO?
Okay. I don't discuss SEO. Google does not. But I believe the right now what has been announced is that if you achieve a certain level of performance, your page does not need to be amped in order to appear in the results console, the little carousel, right? The little carousel device. So your goal should be to be fast enough that you could be featured in the carousel for results for publishers, and you don't need to be amped to do that. But again, if you're amped, if you're using AMP, your performance, you'll get some performance boost from AMP that will get you to core web vitals a little bit easier. But in general, I think that's the only thing that's really been announced. As far as SEO, again, I think most SEO advice is snake oil.
Cool. Yeah, I think. Yeah, sorry, Shali. Let's move on to the next question, and probably.
Lucas, before we move on, there's just one question on the same subject, if you don't mind, please. So this is a question from Shyam. Can you shed some light on refresh time of data of each tool?
I think it is for PSI, it is like on a daily basis, and it takes the last 28 days data. It still actually goes through the Crux report and tries to get data from there, and then the other data as well. I think for the Crux, it is a monthly basis. It is refreshed on a monthly basis.
Hope that answers, Shyam. Sorry, guys, we have to move on. Okay, so the next question is, how do we optimize the web, right, for useful or main content load, which we talked about was one of the key web vital, right? So how do we optimize that? Sal, do you want to take it on this one as well?
Yeah. So the goal should not be to get 100 points in Lighthouse, right? And you win a prize. That's not actually how it works. Lighthouse actually gives you kind of advice. One thing that we could work on, and something I work on with my partners, is translating the Lighthouse advice to what actually it affects. So what causes poor LCP? So one is, again, the server response time, everything above the fold, which is blocking. The correct amount of synchronous JavaScript on your page is 0. One advice I give to people is consider all your synchronous JavaScript to be a defect, and open tickets in Jira for each of the places where you have synchronous JavaScript. You should be doing everything async and deferred to avoid render blocking. You could also optimize your images, optimize whatever scripts you're including. Don't send pixels that will not be displayed. Do not send bytes that will not be executed. Do not send styles that will not be displayed, and so on. Everything there will actually improve the LCP, because the point at which you can start putting everything above it. make use of lazy loading and eager loading as appropriate. Don't, delay the most important hero image. Make sure it's eager, optimize for its load. Make sure that you do a pre-connect if necessary. Get the server to send that as quick as possible.
Cool. Any points, Shelley or Bryce?
Sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Shelley.
Please. Okay. Yeah, what I would like to add is from the server side performance. So we, as part of improving the page load info performance, or also how quickly the useful content is loaded, it's also important that the main thread is not blocked in terms of getting the information back from the server. So we need to improve the server side performance. Also, we need to optimize the server. There are few things, like from the AEM perspective also, that we have to consider all the time. It's like we have to keep the maintenance schedule on a regular basis. We have to do the maintenance jobs, like whether it is revision cleanup or whether it is workflow purge or audit purge. So all that has to be done on a regular process, so that we reclaim the space and improve the server response. Then also, in terms of improving the server response, we would have to take care of the optimization of the OQ indexes, OQ query indexes. Also, if we have a large data that is coming back from the server, then it's better to actually reduce the number of records that are returned at a time. Because in terms of rendering the useful content, it's better that we modularize how much data we are actually showing to the user, and not showing the entire, not getting the entire data at once. So there is also, like, now we have started getting, we have this GraphQL, which is equivalent to like how we implement the middle layer with the REST API. The difference is with GraphQL, we can specify how much data we want. For a particular service, I can specify this much data is required, and I do not need all the other information. So in that way, we can reduce the time it takes to go to the server and get back the response. So that would also be helpful. Then we also have other cache or CDN. We have to have the CDN so that the request goes to the nearest server and not goes to the server every time. We can do the DNS prefetch, like for target and for analytics. Those are third-party JavaScripts. So it's better to actually do the DNS prefetch for that, and also to pre-connect the servers who have those third-party JS scripts only in the end. And while the main content is loading, then we keep on connecting and downloading the other third-party JavaScripts. So these are few things that we can consider while improving the overall performance.
Bryce,
Yeah, I just want to add, you have 4 threads to work with for the connections, and if you're using all 4 threads, as efficiently as possible, you should get all your data as quick as possible. Pre-connect, don't do pre-connect for everything, because that actually defeats the purpose. But using pre-connect for things above the fold, definitely, and using deferred for things below the fold, definitely.
Yeah, I think Shelley had some great points there. And on my list, I didn't even put AEM maintenance, but it's very important that there's a lot of AEM instances out there that are not being maintained. I think she definitely hit the nail on the head on the CDN portion. In the AEM space, the CDNs are very key, just to be able to get your content closer to your end users. You get a lot better big bang for your buck with something like Akamai in the front end, where the servers are much closer, and you don't have to scale out as much of your AEM instances with good cache ratios and good geo spacing of your caching. I think we already hit on it, but there's a lot of tools for obviously the AEM DAM can do different image renditions or video renditions, but also at the CDN layer, there's a lot of tools that are starting to pop up. Akamai's image manager and video manager will do that on the fly on the end as well, to provide much smaller sized images, videos to your end users. Really, gzip, minify, even now the Brotli compression is starting to be used a lot, and that can happen on either tier, whether it's done on your client libraries or on the CDN end. Really, I'd say having your QA teams focus on these metrics. There's a lot of teams where QA teams are testing the functionality, but they're also not necessarily testing speed and performance and these web vital metrics. And I keep harping on it with the browser plugin now. It's really easy for QA teams to be able to see that on a page-by-page basis. And lastly, I'll hit on, it still shocks me how many companies out there don't have good application performance metrics. So using New Relic or Intrascope or App Dynamics as a tool in your tool belt to be able to see real time the metrics of your site from the back end server performance as well as your end user traffic performance. Not everything's going to be technical or code updates. Some stuff could be infrastructure. Some stuff could be just you have peaks and valleys in your user traffic. Maybe for whatever your site's doing at 9 a.m. every morning, you have a lot of users coming in or whatever part of the day, or cyclical during the year, and those can cause poor performance because of those types of trends. So getting that information.
Sorry, guys. Yeah.
Oh, no worries. Go ahead.
Being an AEM, associated with AEM and architecting AEM, I can't stop agreeing with both of you guys. Great points. Right, and thank you for all of that. So there is one question about CLS. So I'll wait for the points where we talk more about CLS. We can take up that question. So one more question from Sham is that the biggest challenge I have is on field data, the way we architected. So is there a way to notify Google field tracking not to consider unless user disabled at browser not to sync? Example, if an external visitor visit our site, we serve from CDN Akamai, where have most optimization like images, etc. occurs. However, if an internal user access our site, the page served without Akamai. So can Google understand, or can we set up somewhere that, basically the differentiation between who is accessing and things like that?
I don't have an answer for that, and I've never seen this. I never considered this. It's kind of an interesting thing. I don't know how much of your internal traffic is logged by Google. I don't know.
Right. I would guess that they wouldn't even know about that internal traffic since it is internal in nature. And
well, if you're using Chrome internally, yeah, it would.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so when you're getting that data, when you're collecting it yourself from like an internal browser, I guess that is a good point to note that you might get different results if you're just hitting it internally versus what your end user gets because they're coming through a CDN or they're coming through some external network into your website. So that's something to pay attention to when you're gathering the metric and when you're gathering the metrics and when you're testing. It's good to test from that end user's perspective. I know there's a lot of companies where when they do their tests that they have to tether to their cell phones because they want to get to an external IP address. And if they're a QA team inside the office, they might be on a VPN and they might be getting different traffic or having different bottlenecks in the way because of the way that corporate networks are set up sometimes. So
I'm a little, like I don't fully understand why they're using. You guys use prod from your own local machine? I mean, like I joke and said, my production environment is called dev.
Yeah, right. Typically not. No, I mean, like you're just going to have dev servers locally. But sometimes QA teams, if they're testing from like an internal network, even if they're testing production, it's still depending on the network traffic could. I
would advise VPN use then.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'll do actually. A lot of times is set up a VPN client to test from different cities too. Because that's another aspect of this is depending on where your end user is, whether in San Francisco, Chicago, London, Hong Kong, they're going to get different performance. And, for a lot of these customers are very global based companies. And, depending on where your user's coming from, you're going to get different metrics. So that's a good point in using the VPN.
Yeah, there's one CDN that was closest to where their main QA was in the middle of the country. It coincidentally picked up every single language of every language file because the QA team tracks every single language for every language file. So when they looked at geographically where the languages are coming from, there's one little spot in the country, in the middle of the country, where it seems to be evenly divided between every single language available.
Cool. I hope it answered you, Shyam. So moving to the next question, we have last 16 minutes. So the next question is next vital, right? So how do we optimize web for better user interactivity? We spoke about the first points, and now the second point, how do we optimize that? So Brass, do you want to take this first? You're always getting a last chance. So
yeah.
No worries. So, I think this slide does a pretty good job of highlighting various buckets to focus on. A lot of this comes down to, I think, maybe Lokesh, you mentioned earlier, but just architectural design ahead of time. Knowing what per your business is most important to show your users, what you want to load first, be able to focus on those, be able to target those as what's loading first in the user's browser. There's a lot of other tools, obviously, Adobe Target and analytics and stuff that go into troubleshooting these or doing A/B tests in regards to just how you design your site and what you present your users. But obviously, I think Sal hit on this too. Blocking JavaScript's a big no-no. Really, I think a lot of teams focus a lot on their components and their authoring side and don't necessarily get into the metrics of the JavaScript itself. And these JavaScript libraries sort of grow over time, and people don't prune a lot of the legacy libraries, a lot of the legacy versions of specific libraries. And those are all being loaded in the user's browser, where there might be one library you're using just one function. And if you had gone and done a deep analysis on that, you could cut that out, and that'll increase your performance greatly. Just not having to load the whole world of JavaScript libraries every time your site's loading, as well as just the position of your script tags and your libraries in the footer versus the head. A lot of times can make big differences.
So do you want to add more points?
Yeah. This is a joke I use, but remember, JavaScript libraries are not Pokemon. You're not supposed to try to catch them all, right? A lot of times I see people include jQuery, use 5 lines of code, and just the native JavaScript would be easier to work with. And you can write it to be async and just load quicker. This is not a knock on jQuery. I know jQuery way too well. We can do jQuery trivia later. And I'm guilty of adding jQuery for things all the time. But a lot of times it's just simply not worth adding jQuery for 5 lines. You've got one little button or something, or one little event that needs to do one little thing. It's really easy just to include jQuery because you know it and you can do it in 3 lines of code, but just write the 5 lines. Those 2 extra lines will save you a lot of headache, save your users a lot of headache.
Great. Shadi, any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, one of the points that I would like to add, almost everything is covered by Bryce and Sal. It's like in terms of, again, Adobe Marketing Cloud, one of the feature that I see that Adobe has now improved is now they have provided the modern AEM SDK, Web SDK or Mobile SDK, where we can include all the Marketing Cloud solutions, like whether it's Analytics, Target, Audience Manager, or we have the Campaign Manager. We can have a single library for all of this. So all the data collection that happens with each of these libraries will be at a single level, and there will be aggregation of all these data collection and would be sent as a single service rather than having a different library included for each of the solution, which would actually make those many network calls and would actually increase the time that it goes to the server and comes back. So that is one useful thing that I see. Integration of all the separate solutions into a single library would be useful.
Cool. So one question, this is an interesting question. So by Yogesh, so how GTM tags can be optimized, especially the GTM could be any third party, JavaScript, right? If you have to include in our application. So how can we optimize a third party JavaScript? Any tools that you guys can suggest?
I mean, it depends again on what your architecture looks like, but using Webpack, anything that reduces or minimizes your JavaScript is a good idea. As far as your tags, the thing about analytics is what I recommend to people is the first step of finding a needle in a haystack is not gather as much hay as possible. It's right, eliminate all the places where the needle can't be. So when you're doing analytics, figure out what each particular thing is trying to give you, what information, what questions is answering, and then figure out a way to answer all those questions with the minimal number of analytics calls. You can do that in a spreadsheet and do like a Carnot map or something, with fancy structure to get the minimal amount of analytic data that you need to answer all your questions. If you can do that, then you minimize the amount of the burden of the analytics as well as the JavaScript on your page.
Cool. The next question is about what is better in terms of loading JavaScript? Is it better to defer load by placing lower on the page or making the JavaScript as asynchronous, or both?
My preference is to, it depends, again, it depends, is it above the fold, is it below the fold, or is it trailing on the bottom? Things that are trailing on the bottom should be async and deferred, like the stuff that you just really need to load at the end of the page. Having things be async on the top of the page is probably best to avoid blocking. Having things be deferred makes sense if it's things going to be below the fold, and then ideally that as the user scrolls up. But again, it depends on where it is on the page and what it does.
Makes sense.
Don't lazy load your hero image, right? Don't do that. Eager load your hero image because that's important.
Yeah, I think that's one of the questions for the next point. So yeah, I think moving to the next question, the third point of Web Vital, right? So how do we optimize the web for consistent and stable user experience? Bryce, thoughts on this?
Again, this goes into design. What do you want to show your user? I think a lot of people went overboard with AJAX calls, and where you'll see that where the page is loading chunk after chunk after chunk, and it sort of just goes down. A lot of times, though, I tend to see that more with advertisements on pages. So that usually that's more the low end sites have those issues. A lot of your more enterprise companies are not going to do that. They want you just to see their product, so they don't have that issue that I see when I are reading blogs or different other things across the web. But really just sort of like Sal said, focus on those big pieces, so your hero image and stuff like that you want to load and show to user, and have it be a static positioning on the page. Really, a lot of this goes into just flickering, just ease of use on your eyes. So there's a lot of also tools out there for accessibility. I think this category sort of hits on accessibility and readability of text and different things like that. But accessibility goes a little bit even deeper. And for AEM, there's a lot of tools out there to be able to measure that and be able to get scores back in regards to, visually how your site, where your users are looking at, how they're reading, how easy is it to read, are they focusing on the sections that you want them to focus on. And yeah, so the ads and the embeds is not necessarily as big of an issue with the more enterprise grade sites as it is for your small mom and pop and your blogs.
Well, Shelly, you want to add some more points?
Yeah, in terms of the layout shift, I think most of the time the layout shift is not a good layout shift when it is happening without user interaction, or a user is not expecting that layout shift. So if the user is expecting, a user clicked on some button and the user was expecting something would happen, then it's all right. Like we can show we can have the layout shift, and that should be closer to the user interaction so that user can relate, okay, this is happening because of the user interaction. There's one point that we need to consider here is like, again, if we have some ads or some personalized content that is getting loaded, it's better to have a placeholder with the best possible size that we have while the actual content is loading. But it's also possible that in most of the scenarios, we do not know what is the actual sizes. So it's better to keep those ads and other personalized content that loads dynamically in the middle page, in the middle section of the page, or in the below the full section, so that that layout shift is not actually really bad layout shift, because the user view is not impacted by that. So those can be some considerations that like we should have some placeholder. And there is also like we can make good use of animations. So animation when used properly, like because it will make the content loading, the dynamic content that is loading or shifting from one position, that will be like gradual. It will not be abrupt shift on the page. So that would also kind of keep the user experience consistent rather than actually giving a abrupt experience to the user. In terms of how we can improve from the AEM side, I think we have this target providing some personalized content, but we can determine like how much space it will take. Also, instead of hiding the entire body, initially we just hide the, we know that this is the section where the content is going to load. So just hide that part of the section. Also, if we keep the CSS always in the head section, that will not repaint the page. Like generally, if you put anywhere the CSS anywhere on the page, that will try to repaint the page. Yeah, these are some things that we can consider to improve the not having the abrupt layout shift.
I'd also add real quick, just in regards to AEM, sometimes I've seen issues in this regard. And actually on one of my previous, most recent projects, they had an issue. It was loading as well as seeing screen shift because they were using too many experience fragments and content fragments in the page. And I know that's a trend that a lot of the AEM implementations are starting to use experience fragments, content fragments pretty heavily. And in this case, I think they had like 15 to 20 of them loaded in the page, and there were big time performance issues just because of that. And we started to see this. So they are a powerful tool to use to be able to edit content in one location, have that content update across your web properties. But you can go overboard using experience fragments and content fragments if you're not careful.
Absolutely. I think anything overused is the problem.
Just real quick. There's a really bad anti-pattern where you don't set the sizes for your ads until the ad is pulled in. If you know the ranges in which your ad could be, like you know that it's going to be 320 by either 50 all the way down to 400, and you know it's going to be either 320 or 300, then you set the largest X and largest Y, and then you just white space out the area around it. And don't be too optimistic. Like my ad will either be anywhere from 600 by 400 down to 300 by 50. That's probably not a good ad unit. You don't want to do that because you're going to do way too much shift, or you're going to have too much white space.
Yep, cool. So one question on the same line. So on the CLS, so would lazy loading the hero image affect CLS?
The thing I want to warn everybody about seems to be a really bad anti-pattern that seems to pop up in a lot of CMS systems. Loading your text first and then the font. Don't do that. I've had this conversation a couple of times now. I don't know why this is happening, but this seems to be happening. Lazy loading hero image means that it'll first start painting content to your screen, and then the larger contentful paint will be after the fact. And more importantly, if you don't have the layout size of the hero image inlined within the particular image or picture segment, it'll basically reformat everything below that. It'll make you very unstable, a very high instability number.
So we have last couple of minutes. So 2 more questions. So the question for you, Sal, is, isn't Google giving conflicting advice with web fonts when it says to set the display to swap? It penalizes for the CLS.
I mean, speaking not as a Googler, as a person who writes code, there's unfortunately there's a lot of conflicting advice. I think things will stabilize over time as we have better patterns. I just finished, like literally, I just finished unlearning the pattern of don't set your image sizes in your code at all ever. Do it all in CSS. I just literally recognized that in order to get a good CLS score, you have to include the image sizes or within your source set and not do it in CSS. So yeah, advice changes.
Cool. So other question, probably, I think for Bryce, you can take it. In general, right, personalization focus on dynamic content injection. Will it impact the CLS? I think you already touched upon it, but.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, yeah, depending on obviously how much logic you have in your personalization, it will most certainly affect certain things. But you know, there's ways to get around that, and that obviously goes into testing and being able to test your various you know, user groups and targets. But yeah, anytime you're doing any type of advanced logic, there's going to be performance trade-offs.
Yeah, I think either personalization or dynamic. So, I mean, potentially the dynamic content itself will definitely needs to be thought through before we add. So, as I was mentioning, anything which we overuse will be a problem. Right?
And I'd say there's definitely ways to cache a lot of that, and you know, not using query strings, but using selectors is a big way to be able to do that. So where the selectors are in your URL and it becomes a cacheable event, a lot of people or a lot of companies get into that pattern of using query strings to have dynamicism in their website, and those all become uncacheable requests, and those are all going to be going through your CDN and hitting your publisher, and you know, you're not going to get as good of bang for your buck as you would if it was a fully cacheable request.
Yep. So the last question, probably, don't Google metrics explicitly call out loading fonts late?
So there's a little conflict here on like optimizing for the best page load time, which would mean load your fonts late, and making things stable, which means don't. 1 pixel per height difference with 100 lines of text becomes 100 pixels of shift, right? There's a conflict there, yes.
All right, so I think we're already 2 minutes late. So we have one last question. So should we take it, or?
Mukesh, we missed one question. If we can just maybe get a quick answer. So this is about how do you file for enhancements when the Chrome UX report API does not have the option to get stat for a particular date?
Crux does not provide data which is not statistically relevant. So if you don't have enough data, it doesn't show you anything. Both the Ad Manager and Search Console, like they will warn you if things are not statistically relevant. I don't think we should be giving people bad data. Like we have some data, it's not statistically relevant. We don't want to present it. We don't want you making assumptions based on the data we can't stand by, right? When you do an ads, if you do an ad experiment in Ad Manager, it tells you like that your experiment is not statistically relevant. Please disregard, you know, like doesn't say disregard it, but in reading between the lines, don't trust things that are not statistically relevant. Like it's the joke about the guy who flips the coin and determines that, you know, quarters always land heads up.
All right, so I'll give you one minute for each one of you guys to answer this. So what should we be doing beyond dealing with the core web vitals for optimizing the performance? 1 minute for each of you.
Light Wallet.
Okay, Sal, there you go.
I can do in one word, Light Wallet. Light Wallet is in part of Lighthouse. You create a little JSON file which explains what you want as your performance budget. We have several pages about it. I think one of my blobs of text from one of those pages. and explains how to do performance budget using Light Wallet. Make it part of your CI/CD pipeline, and measure early.
Cool. Shelly?
Yeah, I'll go with Sal. We need to measure early. As I started my conversation as well, we need to include it as part of CI/CD process. It shouldn't happen after the development cycle is complete. It should happen as soon as the feature is implemented. So we find out what is the regression happening with the performance. Yeah, it has to be integrated as part of CI/CD process.
Bryce, your turn to end with.
I totally agree with all them. Measure. I want to have metrics and be able to see what's going on. And that helps me as an architect be able to design things from server architecture as well as from the front end and the back end. But I'd say one of the things I see in the AEM community that is underrepresented is QA, and QA should be a vital team, and part of your whole development process. And they'll give you that leading indicator, and they're going to be a very healthy gate to pass through, that you're not putting out unperformant code and pages and content out there.
Awesome.
One thing,
Yeah.
if using Jira or the bug tracker under the bug types, performance should be bug type.
Yeah, that's a great point, for sure.
Bug type, so you can put an issue on bad performance on this page or this element.
And I'd say Shelly hit it on it earlier, but add these metrics to your CI/CD pipeline so that you get the result every time you do a build.
Awesome. I think we're already 5 minutes late. So thank you very much, all of you guys. If there's any more questions which has not been answered, we will try to answer it and then publish it in our website. Feel free to visit adobecommunity.org. Thank you everyone for participating, attending this webinar. Hope you guys are going away with some interesting and informative content with you guys. And panelists Shari, Sal, Bryce, thank you so much for being part of it. And Amit, thank you again for organizing it.
Thank you all. Thanks for joining. And this was really last minute to have you, Sal. It was such a pleasure and a treat for all of us, because I don't know how this session would have been without you. So thanks for joining. And all the participants, and see you again very soon, everyone. There will be a survey that Zoom will be sending out by default. So if you can please take the survey, that would be great. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.